There we go. My mic was off for a second. Hello, everybody. Welcome on in. It's nice to see you here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. As we're waiting for some people to pour in, I'll try to do my introduction. Welcome today to Conversations with Authors. Today we bring to you Brittany K. Barnett in her newest book, A Knock at Midnight, a story of hope, justice, and freedom. But before we get to our authors properly, I would like to welcome you to Book Passages Conversations with Authors. If you've seen one of these events before, well, then welcome back. We're glad to have you here. And if you're new here, then Book Passage is a group of independently run bookstores out of the San Francisco Bay Area, and we host and run book talks just like this one very often throughout the week. As we are now streaming on YouTube and will continue to do so in the future, please consider subscribing by clicking the subscribe button just below the video. It's completely free to you and absolutely helps us out by appeasing our YouTube overlords. Additionally, for you, if you click the little bell right next to the subscribe button, you'll be alerted every time that we go live with one of these live streams, regardless of whatever author it is. You'll just get a little alert either to your email or to your phone, depending on where you have YouTube. If you'd like to check out our upcoming events and don't like the idea of subscribing to the YouTube, you can go to bookpassage.com and sign up for our email newsletter. It goes out every Monday morning. It has the list of all of our events for the week, in addition to a couple of featured events. Usually they're ticketed. If you'd like to check out tonight's book, please go to bookpassage.com. You can find the description to it below in the description box or in the blue banner on the top of the chat that you're looking at right now. Finally, if you have any questions for tonight's speakers, make sure you take the time to write them in the YouTube chat. It's the only way to get your questions to everybody, so don't miss your chance to do so. We don't always get to every question, but we really appreciate everything that you send through. Now, allow me to introduce Brittany K. Barnett, who's an award-winning attorney and entrepreneur focused on social impact investing. She is dedicated to transforming the criminal justice system and has won freedom for numerous clients serving life sentences for federal drug offenses, 7 of whom received executive clemency from President Barack Obama. Brittany has founded several nonprofits and social enterprises such as Capital Partners, with a Roman numeral in front of it, Millennial Reign LLC, the Buried Alive Project, Girls Embracing Mothers. She has earned many honors, including being named one of America's most outstanding young lawyers by the American Bar Association. And in conversation today, we have the one, the only Paula Farmer, who, in addition to being a Book Passage event host, curates special panel events for Book Passage that focus on timely social and political issues, such as the smash hit Race in America, Immigration in America, Pride in America, and a number of other ones we've just put up on our website. In 2019, she co-founded and began chairing the Mosaic Committee for the California Independent Booksellers Association. And earlier this year, she was selected for the DEI Committee for the American Booksellers Association. We are very glad to have both of them here with us today. Please, to the audience, welcome to Paula and Brittany.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. I second everything Nick said so eloquently. Welcome and thank you so much for supporting today's event and our other Book Passage events, whether virtually or live. But we will really appreciate the support. And I'm so excited about today's event because I'm a big fan of the book, A Knock at Midnight. Surprisingly, when you hear about the topic, not just, I mean, it's your memoir, but the cases that you've taken on, especially one or two in particular, and obviously your background, you think, oh my gosh, this is going to be kind of dense and heavy, maybe even depressing, but I did not find it that way at all, Brittany. I found myself finishing it in one sitting.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very accessible, approachable, readable. It reminded me in the sense of someone else I just idolize, and you probably do too, Brian Stevenson's book. I just found it just very engaging and readable. If those watching, you haven't bought it and read it, it's available in paperback. So it's also very affordable and I highly recommend it. That, and I really appreciate books on this topic because I think it's such a vital topic for people to know about and challenge the current system. Brittany, thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much, Paula. Very happy to be here.
Yeah. So why don't we start, so to speak, from the beginning? Maybe not from your birth, but when you were young. Um, can we? Can you tell us a little bit more about your background, and specifically your childhood and your relationship with your sister Jazz and your mother, and the challenges that your mother had, and how all of that ended up impacting your life as you became a young adult and a professional?
Absolutely. I grew up in rural East Texas. I'm a country girl for sure, a town called Bogota, Texas, with about 1,200 people. Piece of East Texas that I just call the doors wide open, windows unlocked type of town. And have a younger sister, Jazz. She's 18 months younger than me. We are very, very close. And we had a happy childhood. My mom was a single mother. She put herself through nursing school. She met a man named Billy who became just an integral part of our lives and teaching us how to play basketball, coaching us from the first grade on in basketball, and just being that constant presence for us. Things were happy other than the fact that we were dealing with some very challenging situations at the same time. And that is, my mother had developed a very, very strong drug addiction. And growing up, that was very challenging, especially growing up in the late 80s, early 90s during the height of the war on drugs. It was hard for me as an early teenager to really reconcile it, Paula. We're in school and we have the DARE programs, the Just Say No campaigns. And ironically, for the most part, we're being taught that those of us who fall victim to addiction are the most morally corrupt. They're the bankrupt individuals of us all. And I'm trying to reconcile taking this in with the fact that my mother is fighting a battle that is becoming much, much stronger than she is day by day. And my sister and I are witnessing her downfall. And that is a lot to process as a child, as an early teenager. And then, just having disaster unfold, your tiny arms reach away within your mama, and there was a lot just to really take in with that. Me as a child thinking I could fix her, when I couldn't and it wasn't my place to, or any of the above. It was definitely times looking back and reflecting that was difficult to navigate. And I say all that, and I add to that there was still this unconditional love that my sister and I felt. We had a very large extended family. My dad's mom, Mama Lena, my grandparents, they played a huge role in our lives. And we knew, even with our mama's disease that she was fighting, that we were loved. And I use a quote in my book. I open up the chapter 1 with a quote from Nikki Giovanni from her poem, Nikki Rosa. And she says, they'll probably talk about my hard childhood and never understand that all the while I was quite happy. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I really wanted to set the tone for the book. It is challenging. It's devastating. It's heartbreaking to have a loved one with addiction, but that wasn't my whole life. That wasn't my whole childhood. And I really wanted to show that we as Black people are not living these monolithic lives. Joy and pain can coexist, and I wanted to show that in a way that was just full of love.
Yeah, and you did. And that's interesting that you put it that way, because right from the beginning and throughout your memoir, I definitely got the sense that you always, even though you didn't always understand what your mom went through, although you were very kind of poised and very kind of astute for as young as you were dealing with all this, but I always got the sense that there was no resentment on your part, and that your love for your mom was just unwavering, and that tightness between you and your sister was just wonderful. I mean, given the situations, I mean, like you said, not every family's the same, not every person's the same, not everybody reacts to those situations. And certainly it could be understandable if someone's young and they don't understand what their family members going through, maybe having some kind of resentment until they come into maturity and understanding. But I thought it was remarkable that there was no sense of it as I was reading your memoir. And I thought that was very, very mature and commendable for both you and your sister. And I love how you had such a strong sense of extended family and community.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a very big part of your life, navigating, the situation with your mother and, other things going on in your life, positive and negative.
Yes, it was something that just really formed the foundation of my life. My mother, her family's from a small town 10 minutes from Pagoda called Fulbright. And there's about 150 people in the town. And we lived on this about a 2-mile stretch of blacktop road. And every house on that street was a family member.
Wow.
And it is, you talk about close knit, and then my dad's mom, she only lived about an hour and a half away. And there was just something about Mama Lena, words cannot even begin to touch my appreciation for her and just what grandmothers mean to us, and I really wanted to highlight that in a way that was paying homage to the South and showing that even though my mom was dealing with her challenges, that this extended net, safety net really helped lift my sister and I up. It really takes a village.
Yeah. And so why don't we talk about your mother was dealing with her drug addiction, which you appropriately label as a disease. And it's a disease. It's not a crime. How did she end up in jail, in and out of jail?
My mother, as I mentioned, her addiction just got worse and worse. I remember probably 95, I was in the 4th or 5th grade and she went to rehab. And my sister and I went to live with my grandmother for the year. And then my mother came out of rehab and my sister and I were so excited to move back home and be with Billy and our family. But my mother's addiction had only gotten worse. And it continued to spiral downward. And my mother was arrested. Her underlying reason is drugs, and just her addiction that was out of control. And she got arrested. She had never been in any trouble before. So she was placed on probation. But my mother had a drug addiction. So she was repeatedly failing drug tests on probation, and they would violate her probation and give her more probation. And she failed another drug test and they violated her probation and give her more probation. None of this time did my mother ever commit a new crime. None of this time did anyone ever send her to mandated rehabilitation. None of that came up, and they kept extending her probation until at a certain point of multiple violations for failed drug tests, the judge sentenced my mother to 8 years in prison.
I can't begin to tell you how much that frustrated me reading that. Obviously, it did more than frustrate you, but it just makes me so mad. Here is someone who is a mother trying to get her life on track and not committing crimes, yet in jail, as if jail is the solution.
Right.
Like, how did we even get to that point where we see jail as a solution for a drug problem? And is it disproportionate to Black people and people of color?
Yes, we got to this point, in my opinion, because this country has an addiction. This country is addicted to incarceration. Yeah. And, that's a disease that needs to be dealt with. As I mentioned, I'm from rural East Texas. There's where definitely good old boy justice exists. And it disproportionately impacts people of color. I think it is beyond legitimate debate at this point that this nation's criminal legal system bleeds with racial injustice. And my mother needed help. She needed rehabilitation. She didn't need prison.
Yeah, no, that's all I kept thinking every time I'm reading everything about her, and then what you and your sister are going through, it just enrages me. And I know that's a big part of your life in your book. But for our purposes, that becomes a whole different topic, and we're actually going to go back to it a little later. But I want to talk about how, despite all that, definitely an emotional toll on you, but you were living your life and you actually excelled in academics. And had that close relationship with your sister Jazz and your extended family. What was it like for you going to school and excelling, but not having the specific support of your mother, not because she didn't want to, but because she couldn't be there because of this failed justice system? But as I mentioned, and I want everybody to really realize that you were a really good student.
Thank you. You know, writing a book and reflecting on that time, I almost wonder if it was a trauma response to just focus on school, get good grades, be successful, to take myself away from what was going on at certain times with my mom. Another part, is it was just in me since birth, this innate ambition, and desire to succeed. So I think it was a mix of a lot of variables. And it's something that even through her addiction, my mother instilled in my sister and I. It was even almost like she was showing us, even at my worst, I want you girls to do good. Yeah. And she would always say to us when, we could tell something was off, and it was just a very emotional time, a lot of times during incarceration as well. And she would just say, it's going to be greater later. And she promised us that, and that's something I think I held on to as well.
Yeah. For the sake of the people in the audience that haven't had the opportunity yet to read the book, and obviously we don't want to give away too much, but can you give us a little bit you gave us a little window into your background growing up and the challenges that your mother was going through. How about a little bit of that academic background, like how things were for you in high school, and then you went to college and you actually pursued something in finance, audit and finance is that correct?
It's accounting.
Okay, accounting. So I can use those words interchangeably.
Yes.
Clearly, I don't have that background if I'm asking you that. I just felt like your academic and career trajectory was very interesting as well.
Yes, I was on a track to graduate high school early. I graduated high school in 3 years. And I got to the point in high school where this dream I had was slipping through my fingers. I grew up, I always wanted to be a lawyer. As cliche as it may sound, I wanted to be Claire Huxtable from The Cosby Show. Unfortunately, there weren't any lawyers who looked like me in my town. There were hardly even any lawyers in the town. And for some reason, I just started to feel like becoming a lawyer was out of my reach, that it was something I couldn't do. And so in high school, my focus shifted, and I read a book, Paula. I read a B.B. Moore Campbell book, Brothers and Sisters. And in the book, the protagonist, she worked at a bank, and she was a Black woman, and she had other friends at the bank, and they seemed successful. And from reading that book, I said, I want to work at a bank. I'm going to major in finance, and I'm going to work at a bank. And that's what I did from high school on. And I went to college. I majored in finance. A mentor of mine there, he said, Brittany, you should change your major to accounting. And I said, why? And he said, because accounting is 360. He called it. He said, you can do finance work with an accounting degree, but you can't do accounting work with a finance degree. It'll give you more options. And so I did. I majored in accounting. I got a bachelor's and master's degree in accounting. I took the certified public accounting exam and went to work for PricewaterhouseCoopers and became an auditor. I really worked hard to become a part of corporate America and starting, at a young age to climb the corporate ladder.
But at what point then did the law kind of start getting in your heart? Was it something that, like you said, you were thinking of Claire Huxtable?
Yes.
Kind of tucked it away in the background. And then when did you kind of pull it up front and think, you know what, maybe I can do this and I should do it?
The same mentor who told me to do accounting for the 360, his name was Ken. He was a good friend of mine. And I was borrowing his books to study for the CPA exam. And I just mentioned to him, Ken, I'm thinking about going to law school, really just to see what he would say. And he said, oh, Brittany, you should go to law school. He said, I'm starting law school at SMU in Dallas in the fall. And I was so happy for him. He was a mentor. He majored in accounting. He took the CPA exam. He went to work as an auditor. I'm kind of following in his footsteps. And I was happy he was going to law school. But I remember thinking, Paula, wait a minute, if he can go to law school, I know I can go to law school. So it was that representation, that being proximate to it. And so I shifted to that. And by now I'm doing accounting and I'm at PricewaterhouseCoopers in downtown Dallas. But there was a huge law firm in our building called Baker Botts. And I went to their website. And for any of the lawyers watching, on any law firm's website, you're going to see photos of the lawyers and their names. And I started scrolling through their lawyers, and the first Black woman I saw was Krista Brown Sanford. And I was probably 24 at the time, and 23 maybe. And I sent her this random email. I told her that I worked in the same building, that I was an accountant, and that I had a dream of going to law school. And I asked, would she meet me at the Starbucks? There was a Starbucks downstairs. And I didn't know what to expect. I'm a total stranger. And she responded that day. And she met me at the Starbucks soon after. And that was in 2007. And Krista took my hand in that Starbucks, and she has not let it go since then.
Wow. And it's interesting to me. I think I see a common thread throughout your story of mentorship and positive influences with books and then just people in your life. And I think that's amazing. And I think it's great that you give credit to it, but you remember that you give credit to where those influences came in your life. Where at what point when you're doing law school, which everybody knows, once you do law school, it's kind of all consuming, at least first year, maybe the first 2 years, well, all 3 years, but definitely first year, I'm sure is very all consuming. How is whatever your mom's going through at that time and your sister, how is that like impacting your studies or your decisions for career pursuits?
It was me just wanting to strive to be the best me that I could be. When I made the decision to start preparing to apply for law school, my mother was in prison. She had been sentenced to prison by then. And so I was out here, I'm young, I have a good job, and I'm helping take care of my sister, who's 18 months younger than me, still trying to find her way. And my sister and I, we were going to visit my mom. It was such a crazy time because I'm working at Pricewaterhouse, which is one of the largest 4 accounting firms in the world. And once a month, my sister and I are leaving, to drive down to see my mom at the prison, and no one knew who I worked with. Many of them lived much different lives, but we had to just keep going. I'll never forget, I talk about it in the book a little bit, but my grandpa used to have just the best advice and best sayings that I still take. And I used to go fishing with him when I was younger, and they had a pond in front of their home. And I just remember like venting to him. I was a teenager, I don't even know what teenage woes I was venting to him about. And he would listen so intently. And I just remember one day him telling me, it ain't nothing but a step for a step of it, girl. You just got to keep on stepping. And that's what I did. Even when my mother went to prison and I'm trying to navigate to go to law school and navigate the corporate world and help take care of my sister, I just knew that I had to keep on stepping.
Yeah, and when you were in law school, I got the sense that you were also always still preparing, planning to kind of combine your finance background and corporate kind of interest with the law. And you were steadily thinking corporate law. But things do kind of take a turn, because even while you're in law school, you're actually getting phone calls and emails from friends and family that need help with maybe like a family member. And so how was that kind of impacting your path?
Yeah, it's so strange.
What those emails and contacts were about.
Yeah, so once I'm from a small town, not many of us go to law school, so once people find out Brittany's in law school, they think I'm a lawyer and that I can start practicing law already and that I do all types of law. And, so it's fielding those calls. And I had one of my childhood friends, his father had called me, and my childhood friend, Keon Mitchell, he was serving a life sentence for drugs. And I remembered when Keon was arrested, I remember when he got life, and I remember how shocked the community was of like, how did Keon get life for selling drugs? No, there was no violence, there was no controlled buys, there was no surveillance. Keon was 23 years old and in college. He was a senior in college, actually. But we just kind of thought like, this is just good old boy East Texas justice. I didn't know there was this larger issue, and I remember telling Keon's dad, Mr. Mitchell, I'm just a law student. I can't practice law yet, and I'm letting him know I plan to practice corporate law anyway after. But there was just, really heartbreaking pleas from people like Mr. Mitchell to help their children, who were my friends, who I grew up with, who are serving these just unjust sentences under these draconian drug laws.
Yeah, and so in that is where I think at some point you were starting to get kind of pulled into that, but thankfully I think to maybe set aside the corporate ambitions to help out just what you're talking about, like friends and family and even more people. I'm sure at some point you realize it's not just my community.
Yeah.
This is a national issue.
Right.
So where did you go from there? And then we can start getting into, the very important 2 cases in your life.
Yeah, from there, I just still was on that path to practice corporate law, but I just started taking more classes around the criminal legal system. I did internships with federal judges and was actually sitting in on court hearings and sentencings, and just seeing this conveyor belt of Black and brown people entering the federal system for decades at a time. My mother received 8 years in prison. She served 2.5 years, and that was forever. And so I was interning for this federal judge, and I started seeing people get sentenced for 20 years, 25 years, 40 years, life. And I'm just like, oh, wow, this is really happening. And so I started taking more classes in law school to really try to understand, how did we get here?
Yeah. And then somewhere in there is when you heard the story of Sharonda. Am I pronouncing her name right? Yeah, Sharonda. And once again, I don't want to assume anybody or everybody has read that or even the backliner. So let's talk about Sharonda, how you kind of found out about her situation. And then we can talk about her specific, what her situation is and who she is and all that important stuff.
Yeah, so as I'm searching for meaning, in law school and trying to understand these laws, I took a critical race theory course. And the course is, where you're analyzing the intersection between race and the law. And I was going to write my paper about the disparity in sentencing between powder cocaine and crack cocaine and how it disproportionately impacted people of color. And I learned that there was this law that passed in the late 80s called the 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act. And it implemented this 100-to-1 ratio in sentencing disparity between powder cocaine and crack cocaine. It implemented mandatory minimums and other things. And what that meant was, with the 100-to-1 ratio, that someone could have 500 grams of powder cocaine. I could have only 5 grams of crack cocaine, and we would receive the same sentence in prison. Now, it's not lost on anyone today, especially in the late 80s, that more affluent white people were using powder cocaine, right, and crack cocaine was ravaging communities of color. And this led to a hugely disproportionate number of Black and brown people in federal prison for drugs. In fact, even today, nearly 70% of the people serving time in federal prison for drugs are Black and brown. And so I was learning about all this and just blown away of the sentencing disparities. And I'm learning, well, crack and powder cocaine are 2 forms of the same drug. You can't even have crack without powder. And I'm realizing that Keon was sentenced under the crack, even though no drugs were ever found. He was sentenced under the crack laws. And so it was just eye-opening what I learned. But then I was thinking, I need more for this paper. Like, I want to show the heartbeats. Because by then my mother had been to prison. I really had gotten very proximate to this issue of mass incarceration. And I wanted to show how real people had been impacted, including my friend, Keon. And I wanted to include a woman as well. And one night in the law library, I literally did a Google search and I typed in like woman, federal prison, drugs, and the case of Sharonda Jones popped up.
Wow. And before we go too deep into Sharonda, I want to kind of, because you mentioned it, I'm looking at your book, my marked up book of yours. But when you brought up classes and critical race theory, you had a Professor Lacey, and he says that critical race theory takes as its premise that racism is ingrained in the fabric and system of American society. He says, that's not a question and not up for debate in this class. The question is how. And I thought, wow, what year was that? Because now, of course, we're hearing so much about critical race theory, but I have a feeling back then it wasn't being talked about that much.
It definitely wasn't. This would have been the fall of 2009. And it's just so ironic, the discussions that are happening now, the laws that are being passed now to strip this study out. And it's also heartbreaking because that critical race theory course, it changed my life. And it helped me save a lot of other people's lives, so it had just a monumental impact on the trajectory.
It must kind of anger you a little bit to hear it talked about now, and it's actually debated.
Yeah, it's very frustrating because it's more often than not, it's debated inaccurately. It's just like, what critical race theory are y'all talking about? Because I didn't know that was it. It's just like these made up definitions, this made up just preconceived notions on what it is and what it means. And I think we just have to be honest with ourselves. The premise of it, as you just read, that Professor Lacey taught in our classes, it's analyzing the intersection between race and the law, and how race is definitely a huge part in racial injustice and bias in our laws today, and how we can deny that when the Constitution itself is written by slave owners and is saying that Black people and slaves are 3/5 human. Like, how is the founding document embedded in racism and everything else that flows from it is not? And so it really has been very frustrating to hear a lot of the misguided opinions and thoughts these days, especially after taking the course.
Yeah, and that some people don't get it and they don't want it, or they're automatically against it and they don't want it taught. And as you said, it's something that totally changed your life and your way of thinking and your career.
Exactly. Definitely.
Yeah. So was Professor Lacey, was his thinking and the way he taught about that unusual, or is that pretty common in law school?
It's pretty common in law school. Critical race theory originated in law schools, and it's taught. I was happy it was taught at SMU. I don't think it had been taught very long by the time I was able to take the course, but it's something that was just eye-opening on many levels.
Yeah. So back to you kind of find via the internet what could be your next interview. And Sharonda, so how did you two actually meet? So you find out about her case, you're interested in it and you want to study it and be a part of it, but how did you actually meet?
So after finding out about her case, I sent her a card. I remember when my mom was in prison and my mom would tell me how important it was for people in prison to get mail and how many of the women never received any mail at all. So I sent Sharonda a card. I told her that I learned about her case. I told her I was a law student, that I was going to practice corporate law, and I knew next to nothing about criminal law, but that I wanted to help her get out of prison. And she wrote me back. I still have the letter she wrote me back from 2009. And she wished me well in my studies, but she was very kind of nonchalant. It was kind of like, she'd been let down a lot by lawyers, you could tell. And here I am, a law student that doesn't practice criminal law. And I'm telling her I'm going to get her out of prison from a life sentence. Sharonda Jones was serving life without parole for her first ever conviction, felony or otherwise, for a drug offense. And it was mind-blowing. And I went to visit her. She was in prison in Fort Worth, Texas, probably about 45 minutes from me. And I went to see her in person, and it was just like meeting family right off the bat. I saw so much of myself in her. Sharonda Jones is a Black daughter of the rural South like me. She was just so friendly and positive in spite of, waking up, facing a reality that would be unbearable for many people because there's no parole in the federal system. So Sharonda Jones was serving a fundamental death sentence. She was set to die in prison. And when I would think about it, I'm like, she's serving the same amount of time in prison as the Unabomber.
That's crazy. That's a good way of putting it. That is crazy. I love that you're putting it that way. It really drives home the point. And you start off the book, your prologue is actually about her and her case. And it's just heart-wrenching because she's thinking and her lawyer's thinking, don't worry, you're going to get off. I think he said maybe max, you might end up a year, or maybe he said a little bit more, but he was like, but don't even worry about it. I think you're going to be acquitted. And so she was just kind of hopeful that that was going to fall into place. And then the next thing she knows, it's like, and that she was even freaking out over 1 to 5 years because she wanted to see her daughter go on to high school. And then the next thing she knows, she's like a life sentence. It's crazy.
It is just, it's both morally and economically irresponsible that we sentence people to that kind of time in this country. I mean, a life sentence, it's the second most severe penalty permitted by law in America. It screams the person is beyond hope, beyond redemption. And quite frankly, Paula, it suffocates mass potential as it buries people alive. Sharonda Jones is a phenomenal woman, phenomenal soul. We're not here advocating that people go out to sell drugs. You commit a crime, there are consequences for those actions, but Sharonda Jones in no shape, form, or fashion deserved a life sentence by far. And so it was just so disheartening. And one of the main intentions for me for the book was I just wanted the readers to feel the heartbeats on every page.
Yeah, yeah, you definitely do. It's heart-wrenching, it's inspiring. Um, so I don't know how much of it you feel comfortable with giving away as far as her, Sharonda's actual case and your involvement. And I think it's important to drive home the point that we're talking about non-violent drug-related crimes. And I kind of have a rule that if I ever hear like someone says they're about to serve jury duty, I always say, remember, if it's a non-violent drug-related, just acquit. Like just, I mean, like really, because then, as you said, because the sentence is going to be too, there's a chance it can be too excessive for what is really at stake. And it's not solving the actual issues. But so how much of Sharonda's case do you want to tell us, but still keep people interested to read the book for themselves?
Yeah, I will tell y'all that from that visit, that very first visit with Sharonda, we became like family, and we embarked together on a long journey of freedom. Long journey of freedom. And it was eye-opening on so many levels. Sharonda Jones is just a beautiful soul. And it's just still warms my heart to see her face and how positive she was. And even with serving a life sentence, and how even the other women in the prison, you could tell in the visitation room how they just navigated towards her, and how her positive energy was so contagious, and it was just my absolute goal. I said in that day that I met her, like, I'm going to fight for Sharonda Jones's life as if it were my own, because it was.
And so, but we don't want to give everything away. We'll let people be intrigued to finish, to read it and finish it, right?
Yeah.
But someone, Dion Garcia wants to know, how is your mother? What's going on with your mother? How is Sharonda? And other cases that you've taken on that you feel like you can share?
Yeah, no, my mom is doing great. Thank you so much for asking. She ended up serving 2.5 years in prison, and it was the most challenging time, of my life. But I always love to tell people that my mother became sober. She became sober despite of prison, not because of it. She found something deep within herself, to begin her healing journey. She's been home for over 13 years now. She's been sober 16 years now, and she actually works as a drug recovery nurse for a rehabilitation center here in Dallas. And so she is just doing remarkable. I founded a nonprofit called Girls Embracing Mothers for young girls whose mothers are incarcerated. And my mother has been an integral part of that nonprofit. For 8 years, we've partnered with Texas Women's Prisons and taken girls from the Dallas-Fort Worth area to visit their moms in prison every single month. And it was all born from that just challenging time that we went through. And so it's just all beautiful. And it's beautiful to see my mom so involved with that, and I went from law school to practice corporate law. I began a corporate career that I enjoyed, and I worked pro bono at night, on several cases of people like Sharonda Jones who were buried alive. And, from there, it really gave me a chance to just see so much genius behind bars. I mean, so much ingenuity that this nation needs to thrive. And I just really vow to do what I can, to help free people, to unlock people and potential.
So it's really kind of a misnomer to call it a correctional facility, because they're not doing any rehabilitating, they're not correcting anything. They're just, I mean, we know, and I know from talking to other people about this topic, or kind of on or near this topic, that a statistic that stands out, that the US is actually I don't know the correct terminology, but the most jailingest country in the world. There's probably a more technical or legal term, but basically the United States does more incarceration and not actual rehabilitation. And a lot of that incarceration are people who are getting over sentenced, like your mother, like Sharonda, and the other community friend. And there's just no paying attention to this. And so I'm wondering, between all those statistics and in your legal background, what would you like people to come away with your book, with your memoir, with these individual stories? I know you just mentioned a big part of it is that realize that there are people there who shouldn't be there, and that there are people there that could be of so much value to society.
That was the crux of it. I wanted people to read the book and take away the truth about racial injustice that bleeds through this nation's criminal legal system, the truth about the people in cages and this human ingenuity and potential. I really want the readers to take away that heartbeat, to feel that heartbeat, and to really educate themselves about the system and find different areas to help make a difference. There is such a popular topic now, criminal justice reform. It's fashionable, it's a hot topic, but I'm always just amazed at how little people know about how the system actually works, including myself. When I first got started, how does someone actually get a life sentence? Because when I hear life sentence, I think international drug cartel, I think drug kingpins, and it was just eye-opening for me to learn. So I wrote the book to educate as well, and to know that we can be a part of the solution. It seems so overwhelming, so inundating. The system is just flawed in its design, but we can all do small pieces to help, take the bite at this beast of a system that we have, whether it's by voting, and ensuring that elected officials who believe in criminal justice reform are being held accountable, whether it's by volunteering at your local grassroots organizations who are focused on criminal justice reform, whether you're in hiring positions to hire people with criminal backgrounds or rent to people through housing for people with criminal backgrounds. Like, we all can play some type of role, and that's what I'm hoping that readers take away from the book. And I wrote the book, for a third reason that I talk about often is I wrote the book for young girls of color. I'm hopeful that they can see themselves through me and, know to dream their biggest dreams.
Is there, because we didn't get into talking about the gender issue, we were talking about the system in general, but is there anything specific in the injustice of it to women versus men? I mean, we were talking about how for Blacks and people of color, but I'm wondering, is there anything we should know specific to women in prison?
That's such a great question. Women are the fastest growing incarcerated population. The number of women in prison has increased over 700% since the 80s. And in Texas, where I live, Texas incarcerates more women by sheer number than any other state in the country. And research shows that nearly 80% of those women are mothers. And so not only are we incarcerating women at a skyrocketing rate, but we had to remember that women are often the primary caregivers of children. And so it's a lot different than when the father goes to prison. Most often when the mother goes to prison, it disrupts the entire household. And so there's this collateral consequence of incarceration, and that is the children, and that is something that I am so glad, it's the reason I'm so glad you asked that question, because it is a huge issue and it needs to be brought to the forefront of this movement to transform the criminal legal system.
Why is that where women are concerned? Why are they more likely to be incarcerated?
It is a wide variety of issues. A lot of it teeters on poverty, lack of resources and opportunity, lack of education. The women in the program that I mentioned that we have, Girls Embracing Mothers, 100% of the incarcerated women in our program have been impacted in their lives by some type of underlying trauma. A lot of it is having women who are accompanying their boyfriends to commit crimes. And, it's a way that when we look at it and realize the diverse, unique nature of women in crime, I'm hopeful that people will pay more attention to it so that resources could be offered for the women and their children.
Yeah, that's good. We do have a couple other audience questions I'd like to get to before we wrap up. Catherine asks, how can we stop our prison system from being responsible for mental disorders? The cost in lives is enormous.
That's a great question too, and it comes to that whole nature of why do we have prisons? Where is the rehabilitative nature? Where is the treatment? This country spends $80 billion a year, 80 billion on incarceration a year.
Wow.
And just thinking if we reallocated those funds to education, to healthcare, to mental health, as she just asked, what a difference, what transformation could be made. And I think to answer her question, we have to completely reimagine what justice looks like.
Wow. So before we go, you mentioned the organization you're involved in. If you'll say it again so people can write this down. And then if there are any other organizations that you would refer people to, please do so. And then we can kind of wrap things up. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Paula. I really enjoyed it. The organization I mentioned is Girls Embracing Mothers. Girlsembracingmothers.org is the website. We're also on Instagram at Girls Embracing Mothers. And we were also recently featured on PBS NewsHour a couple of months ago. Our summer camp was highlighted. So definitely Google us and check us out there. And then I'm also a co-founder of the Buried Alive Project, and we work to provide legal representation for free to people who are unjustly sentenced for federal drug offenses. And today we've helped free over 50 men and women, and nearly 80% of them were set to spend the rest of their lives in prison. So we're really doing the work that we can to unlock people and potential and to really help to do our part to advance this movement towards transforming this criminal legal system.
Oh, and I lied. I'm sorry, Nick. I do have one last quick question. I did want to know about the title of your book.
Yeah, so the title of my book, it is titled after a Martin Luther. Oh, I thought my system froze. It's titled after a Martin Luther King sermon called A Knock at Midnight. And in the sermon, he tells us this parable about a weary traveler who is seeking food. He's seeking loaves of bread at midnight. And a man knocks on his neighbor's door to get the weary traveler the bread, and he keeps knocking at midnight, and he keeps knocking, and the neighbor won't answer. And the man keeps knocking, and the neighbor is saying, my children are asleep. And the man keeps knocking. He's persistent, but Dr. King, he intones that the bread, there's 3 loaves of bread, and that is hope, faith, and love. And he tells us in the sermon that the weary traveler seeking loaves of bread at midnight is really seeking the dawn. And the eternal message of hope from that sermon is that the dawn will come.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you so much, Brittany. And now Nick is joining us to kind of wrap things up, but I so appreciate your book and your work. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you so much.
Alrighty then. I'm really glad that we had such a good time. Thank you everybody for coming. This has been a really lovely time. The book is A Knock at Midnight. You can purchase it at bookpassage.com. We'll ship it right to your house, just like any other online retailer. You can find the everything that you need to purchase the book either in the blue link in the chat or in the description below. There's a big sign that says "Buy the book here." Other than that, thank you one last time, Paula and Brittany, for coming and talking about all the good stuff. Thank you, Paula, for hosting. This was a little bit of a last minute. Well, not exactly last minute, but a little last minute for you. It was nice that you did us the pleasure of doing this. And also, thank you to all of you at home for coming. We host these book talks, one, because we like them, and two, because we're always here to get out and to get exposure to as many authors as possible. But, we mostly do this because that's what independent bookstores do. We host book talks just because we like talking about books. So if you do enjoy learning and hearing about books and learning new things, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel just below. We do talks like these at least many times a week. I don't know what number that is, but at least a couple. But other than that, thank you one last time for coming out. The book's at Knock at Midnight. Thank you one last time. We'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.